All right, so it should be recording now. Uh, so the course outline, last week we covered if statements. We'll do a little refresher of this again with the if, then, else if, else, and if type of structure. Hopefully you guys remember that, but we can do a quick refresher with that as that's going to come up again today. And then we have loops, which, like I said from the beginning, is probably the thing you want to have the best grasp of when it comes to VBA. I would say pretty much everything else you can Google and figure it out on the fly, but loops are something that really comes up every time I build a macro, and you want to have it down as to the loop structure and be pretty comfortable using these, and that's why I was suggesting that I'll give a little homework for you guys to practice with between now and next time. So there's going to be two main types of loops. We have do, and they're I guess we can call them a do while loop and for loops. And the structure for them is a bit different. We'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both of them and when you would want to use a do while versus a for type of loop. So those will be some of the pieces we cover today. Any questions before we get into it?
Nope.
No? Okay. So let's begin with the Excel file. And do you guys have the Excel file that I sent to you pulled up? I can also send it in the link message again if you'd prefer.
No, I have it.
I
I have it open.
have it. I have that open.
Okay, so have that open. I will save mine with the same naming convention I've been using for the other trainings so I can send it out to you guys after. So this is week 5. All right. So before we get into this, though, let's just go back into the developer and do a quick recap of the if else statements. So do you guys remember the structure? Does someone want to walk me through the if else? And you can just kind of say it in the general structure rather than actually using an example of it. But Annabelle, Nan, when do you want to walk me through it?
Well, I mean,
Oh,
it's basically the same as with using an Excel formula. I
okay.
mean, you go if, and you have a whatever it is that you need, and then for that if, then you have to use that then.
Okay. So
Which
we'll call it the condition, which will be the
a
true
condition,
false.
true false condition,
Okay.
and then from then on, then it's depending on what you need. If you have several conditions, then you can use the else if, and then
Okay.
at the end, the last one you can use just else, and never forget the end if.
Yeah, that's something that'll kind of screw you up with the macro. You'll get Excel yelling at you. But yeah, always remember the end if. So just to say what Annabelle was saying, and I'm just commenting this out, but you can have a else if and then some condition, do some more code, and maybe have an else. And then end it with the end if, as he was saying. And I forgot if I mentioned this last time, but kind of the convention for using if statements, and we'll get into it with loops as well, but the way you format it, which you'll notice becomes a real, like it just helps you be able to read it later on, is when you have an if, then you can indent the next lines of code. And let's say you have an if statement within an if statement, then you would kind of continue to indent it. So you would do a double indent there, and you can see the format of this, but that'll really help you read it later on, so you know that this if statement is related to all of the code within it, and you can easily see by tabbing it in. So forget if I mentioned that, but that'll come in handy later on. So there you go. Pretty basic if type of statement, but Annabelle, thanks for walking us through that. Okay, so just because I don't want to take up too much of the time reviewing this, and if statements will come up again through the loops today, so we'll just hop right into the loop section, and we can kind of review the ifs as we go through that. So I'll kind of talk about this more in the form of the question of the project we'll try to do today, and hopefully that'll make it a little more interactive and interesting instead of just talking about the theories of loops. We'll talk about it more in terms of problem solving as VBA typically is done. So hopefully that'll keep you guys interested, and we'll keep it very keep it real with the example here. So maybe there's a way to do this with just using basic Excel formulas, but for the purposes of this class, we'll try to solve this question with VBA. So here we have a list of a bunch of colleges in America. You can see that the names of certain schools are repeating. So the first school is American University, and we have different years, and we have different national rankings for that school. So it's kind of a weird format for a list, but we have it repeating upon itself with the school for as many years as there were, and then each ranking, and that repeats itself, Auburn, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And overall there is 600 or so rows of data. So now let's say in terms of readability, we wanted to create a macro that would loop through this list, and it would highlight each of the top rows of the university with, I mean, we can make it any color we want, but just kind of give it a different type of formatting. You could bold it as well, which maybe we'll do today. But anyways, just in terms of easiness to read, we'll want it to give a different formatting to the top row. And like maybe I was saying maybe there's a way you could do this with Excel, like if you sorted by year and then filtered for only the top year, which maybe it's 2013, but maybe for some other schools they don't have a 2013 ranking, so it's 2012 for them, and maybe they get lost. So I was thinking about it, and there's really no perfect way to highlight the top row without using VBA, and more importantly, without using a loop, unless you guys can think of one. But this is just an example that I was coming up with.
But when you say the top row, are you talking about the, for this one, it's the latest year they had. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. So I mean, in this case, it is sorted by name of university and then by year. But more importantly, I mean, it's just the top row of any university.
But only if they send it to you by sorting that way.
Yeah, I mean, we could sort that way even after they've sent it to us. Like if let me remove this formatting, and so we can make sure that it's in that correct order.
Right. So you will sort it by name and then by the year.
Yeah, sure. We can.
Right.
We can do
That's
that.
what okay.
So that should pretty much return the same ordering we had anyways. But yeah, you can do that just to confirm that the sort is the right way. So our project for today is we will build a macro which is going to do kind of as I was doing, very, very manually, give us a little bit of formatting for each top instance of the university. And we will take it one step further. First, I guess we can start with a for loop for this, and then we will repeat it, but we'll use a do while loop. Hopefully that helps you guys see how they're similar and different, and we can talk about why you would want to use one rather than the other. In this case, it probably doesn't matter too much, but we can talk about instances when it might matter. So let's go back into the editor. I will get rid of our if statement, and let's create a new loop. We will call this let's call this for loop. So here's our new macro, and so just to give you guys a understanding of the basic format of a for loop before we really get into it. So what a for loop is going to have is it's going to have a line that begins the for loop, and it's going to say for an integer from x to y, and those will be any two numbers, from for I from 1 to 10, do a line of code or do many lines of code, and then cycle through that. So maybe you guys have seen this, but for I equals 1 to 10, do something. So
Can you repeat that?
yeah. So I'm going to write it out. I think that's going to be more easy to understand. But something along these lines is what you're going to see for loops. So for I, and I is a number. It's going to be an integer variable that we create, and you don't have to necessarily
dimension.
You can. I've seen people kind of skip this step if it's used within a loop, but I mean we can do it just for convenience and so we know it's there. But anyways, this is the general the general architecture for a loop, for a for loop. So for I equals 1 to 10, do some code, and then go to the next I. So we can step through this, and F8 is going to be a really good friend when it comes to loops because it lets you know what's going on at any moment. So if I go to F8 and I'm stepping through, so nothing's happening. We don't have any code here, but if I hover over I, we can see that it equals 1 because this is our first time through the loop. But then once we hit the next I line, it's going to, well, it actually won't do anything because we don't have any code to run, but each time I press it, it's just going to loop back through. And actually, you know what? Just so it makes sense that there's something going on, let's give ourselves a message box, and we'll say so just a quick string, but we'll just print out how many times we've been through the loop. So if I go back here, you've been through the loop 1 time, and it's going to get pretty annoying because it's going to keep telling us how many times we've been through the loop. But you can see that once we hit next I, then it's going to go back to the first line of code within the loop, which in this case we only have 1 line of code, but it's going to give us our message box again and keep cycling. It's going to keep going. So if we run this, it's just going to keep popping up this message box. You've been through 7, 8, 9, 10, and then once it gets through that 10th time, it's going to exit the loop, and then it's going to end the sub that we're in. So at the most basic level, this is really as simple as it gets with loops, but that's your basic for loop right there. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yep. Yeah, I've done a bit of basic when I was in college.
Nice. I never done this, so okay. Then let me ask you this question because so while you're doing it, because I'm not going to type in the same time you are because I really want to focus on this. While you're doing this, I'm thinking about the project I am going to be, do I use this? I don't know how this will apply for the macro I want to work on.
Yeah, I mean, it may not. It may not be something that applies to your macro, but it is very common with many of the macros I build that you're going to want to loop through a list or loop through values in a table. And I mean, pretty much the sky's the limit once you start using loops. I mean, maybe one way that it would apply to you is that you could loop through the sheets in a workbook. And if you want to do something similar to each sheet, you could like loop from sheet 1 to sheet 10 and do something to each one of those sheets. So that might apply. Not sure if that is anything similar to what you're doing, but for this one, you kind of got to think a little outside the box. But once you start getting into loops, for me, that's where the real time saving occurs within macros. And maybe next week I can show you a demo of one of the macros that I've built, which it like loops through through generating PowerPoint slides. You guys may have seen the automated slide builder, but then it can take it a step further and you can loop through generating multiple PowerPoint decks. Like that's where you can do 1,000 things with a click of a button and it'll all be quite automated. So anyways, tons of time savings here and just kind of think about it as we go, and I'm sure you'll think of a way that it'll make your life easier as we get into it. So anyways, this is our basic for loop. Feel free to stop me at any point if you have a question, but I'll keep going and we'll get back to our example of highlighting the first row for each of the schools. So this is still going to be our same structure. So we can leave that here. We'll clear out the code that we're going to do in the middle, but we'll maintain the for and the next lines, and we can kind of build into that. So let's think about some of the questions that we'd want to resolve when building out the for loop we were talking about here. So things that we'll need to know. We'll want to know how many times we'll need to loop through the for cycle, and we are going to need to do it all the way from row 2 through row 609. So that would be the first thing that we can do. So we know that we're going to loop through this that many times. So for 2 to 609, but just to make it a little cleaner, and I would suggest that you have the last row be dynamic. So right now, if we were to plug in a new table that had a different number of rows here, this 609 wouldn't be valid anymore because there'd be a different number of rows. So we'll create a variable, and I'll often use this. We'll call it last row, and that's going to be an integer. And we can quickly name that variable. So last row equals, let's see if I remember this off the top of my head, range 1, current region, rows count. And this is a good formula. You don't have to remember it, but something that's useful to have near you on your note sheet. But we can see when I begin stepping through it, it's gonna know that our last row is 609, and it's going to do that by looking at the current region of cell A1 on this worksheet, and then it's going to count the number of rows within that region. So now we can change our for loop to go from I equals 2 to the last row. So that's step 1 right there. And then we need to think about how are we going to differentiate the college from being any college within the list to being the top college within the list? Like the first college of its name within the list. So any ideas as to how we can identify which of the 6 different American universities is the top American university? And this one's kind of a tricky one, so I might have to give you the answer just to get your mind thinking along these lines. This is where loops can become a little tricky and challenging. So any clues on this?
Yeah.
Annabelle, any thoughts?
Do you want to know? I mean, find a way between American University, which one is the lowest?
So I mean, maybe
Or
we can
between
think.
all universities?
Uh, so maybe we can think about it for Auburn. Like, let's say we've looped through a certain amount of times the college, and we can create a variable for the current college that we're looking at, and we can say, okay, what's the college that we're looking at right now, and we can use that based on the row number that we're on. So when we're on row number 2, we can say, what college are we looking at? Well, the current row is 2, so we're looking at American University. I think the question that we'll want to answer is if the college name in the current row is different from the college name in the previous row, then we know that the current college name is the first one in the set. So does that make sense? It's like if we look at American University as the current college, the previous row would actually show, in this case, name of university, which doesn't make sense because it's not a university, but it is different from American University, which means we'd want to highlight the current row given that. Let's say we moved on to row 3, then the current university is American University, but the previous university name is also American University. Then we don't highlight that. So that'll be kind of the general concept for the if statement. We'll have to have an if statement within there, but we can get to that in a second. But so first, let's create 2 new variables. We'll have to have it be the current row's university and whatever the previous row or row 1 above that, whatever that university is. So uh, yeah, so it can get a little complicated with this, but I mean, hopefully you guys can follow the logic, and once you start thinking about it in this in like the looping sense as to where we are now, where we were just before, where we're going, once you can kind of think about it in that way, it's going to be a lot easier. And as you do practice, I swear it kind of becomes natural. So we'll get there. But first, let's call it. We'll create a variable and we'll call it college name. That's going to be a string. And we will create one more called college name previous, and that's also going to be a string. So now we have to think about where we're going to set the names for the college name and the college name previous. Do we want to set it outside of the loop or inside of the loop? And I think in this case, well, we'll see later on, because in other cases you're going to want to set it outside, but in this instance we will want the college name to be the college name and the college name previous to be reset every time we cycle through the loop. So we'll set it inside, and let's I'm just going to keep going with this, and hopefully it'll become clear as a little more is written down and built out. But we can we can call the new variable college name, and we will set it here to the current value. And remember that we can conveniently use as the row that we're currently sitting on. So we can set the college name to cells I, comma 1, which is going to give us the value in column 1 and the current cell that we're in, and we will take the value there. Similarly, college name previous. Any idea what we're going to set this one to? I'll give you a hint. It starts.
To be I minus 1.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. So it's the current row minus 1. So if we're at I is 2, then we want to be looking at the one step up. So I minus 1, comma 1. And now we'll just test out how far we've gotten at this point. So I'm going to step through it. We have last row gets set to 609. So I equals 2 the first time through the loop because we have it set from 2 to the last row. So then college name, which is going to be cell 2, comma 1, gets set to American University, and college name previous gets set to, well, in this case it's 2 minus 1, comma 1, so that's going to be 1, comma 1, which is name of university. And if I hover over this, there we go. So we haven't actually told it to do any code yet other than setting our variables, but we have kind of the general structure here. And we can now go into our next step, which is going to be building an if statement to do something only if the college name and college name previous aren't equal to each other. And I've violated my first rule of formatting. So when you're within a for loop or a do while loop similar to an if statement, you're going to want to indent just for easeability of reading. So that means each time we cycle through this, the college name and the college name previous are going to change, and we're going to now do something only if the college name and college name previous don't equal each other. So if college name, and I forget if I've shown you this operator, well, but this is the do not equals sign. So if college name does not equal college name previous, then, and we're going to do some code within here. So we are going to want to do some formatting within here, and I actually don't know how to do it off the top of my head in terms of highlighting and changing the, we'll say the background color, and maybe we'll do a bit of bold text. But so let's actually take a step out of the macro we're writing right now, and we will record a macro. So I can record it into this workbook, and we just need to know how Excel would format this, and we'll give it a nice, I don't know, gray and bold, and that's it for now. So we'll see what that macro looks like.
Jim, this workbook?
Weird. It usually creates a new module for you within the workbook. Maybe. Okay. Here we are. So I'm actually realizing that I guess the macro that I was building right then, that loop, was in the wrong workbook. We can see that it was in the week 4 demo. I want to be here in the week 5 demo. So I'm just going to paste it in here. And we have the new macro that we just recorded on the same page. So let's see what just happened there in terms of the macro we recorded. So here we have range A2 to C2, which was the range that we highlighted and formatted. And then these pieces I think we can delete out. And then we have a width formula, or a width function. And I'm not sure if I don't think we've talked about width yet, but this is going to do a set of commands, or in this case, formatting changes for the entire selection that we have. So, I mean, the nice thing is you don't have to do range A2 to C2 dot select dot pattern and then repeat this time and time again for each of the different things within, like this is what it is essentially doing, but it saves Excel some repetition of having to do it each time. So we'll just do select, and then we'll do each of the formatting changes in here for the selected range. So what we will do is we will go back into our loop and back into our if statement within the loop, and we can use the range. But here we need to make sure that the range is dynamic, and see how it was looking at only A2 to C2. Well, now we want it to be looking at the current row. So we can build that for ourselves. And you can remember that I is still a variable. We can still use this variable within the loop. So for A2, and it'll attach those. To C. So do you see how we just built this string here, which is in this case the same thing as A2 to C2, but now it's dynamic depending on which row we're currently in. Following me there?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we have our current row. We're going to select that, and then we'll just copy and paste our width and the font bolding formula as well. So here we go. This should, now we can try by stepping through it and seeing how it works, but hopefully this loop is going to do okay for us in terms of the formatting changes we want. So if I step through this, so we're going to do, it's going to set the last row. We're going to enter the loop, and it's going to start with American University. Previous university is a different name, so now it should step into the if statement. It's going to select that range, and if we jump through the width piece, it will change it to gray, and it's also going to bold it, and then it's going to step out of the if statement, and it's going to hit the next I line. So it's currently at 2, but now it's going to jump back to the beginning of the loop. It's going to check to see if I is equal to the last row. If it's not, if it's less than the last row, it's going to increase the value of I by 1. So now I equals 3, and it's going to keep going. So this time through, checks to see the college name current in row 3 is American University. The college name previous, which is the one in row 2, that's also American University. Hopefully it'll skip over the if statement we have there because we don't want it to change the formatting of row 3 at all. And it'll cycle through. So now that we've written this and it looks like it's working okay, I'll stop it. I will undo the formatting changes we've done. And I forgot if I mentioned this to you, but you can't hit undo after you run a macro. So that's why you want to make sure you save it frequently. Like I had to go back and manually undo that change. You can't just hit the undo button. So we'll want to make sure we save it frequently because any mistakes we make, we can't just go back and hit undo. So let's run this macro fully now. I'm going to click the green arrow, and it is done in just a few seconds. And it looks like it worked okay. It looks like all the top names are highlighted in gray all the way down the list. So maybe that makes our reader have a little easier time seeing this table. And it might not be, in this case, too useful of a macro, but a handy feature, and it's useful to definitely know the logic behind this. So any questions with our first loop here?
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty nice. It's a lot better than manually going through and changing it.
Nice.
All right. And Annabelle, have you been able to follow along with us?
Yeah.
All right, great. And then I'll share this out with you after. Hopefully you can go through the video and recreate this yourself. All right, great. But so that's our first for loop. Now, let's say we were going to recreate something pretty similar with a do while loop. And fortunately, we're not going to have to redo the entire process with this one. We're only going to have to redo the loop architecture. And I mean, the if structure is still going to stay the same. So that makes this second time through a little easier. I'm also going to remove the formatting that we've just done so we can repeat it using the do while type of loop. And all right, I'm going to create a new macro here. So this is going to be a do loop. And Annabelle, do you have any experience? Have you seen a do loops before?
No. Well, if it's basically the same as loops, more.
Yeah, I mean the logic is really quite identical, but it's a bit of a different structure than what we just saw for the for loop. So if you recall the for loop, it's going to go from the number that we specify as the start number to the number we specify as the end number. And that's how we know, that's how the for loop's going to work. It's going to break out of the loop once it hits that the last row in this case, which is the last integer we have. A do loop, on the other hand, is going to do something. It's going to do the code until the condition is not met, which might sound pretty similar, but it's kind of it'll make more sense as I build it out, but it'll keep doing something forever until the condition is not met. So in this case, we might want it to keep cycling through until it reaches a blank cell in column A1, and we can see that all the values are populated in A1 until row 610, and then at that point it's gonna say, all right, what's the value here? It's a blank, which doesn't meet my condition, and then it's going to stop the loop, and it's going to break out of the loop. So I can show you how we would go about writing this, and some of the pieces are going to be similar to what we had at the top. So we can maintain the college name and previous college name. And we can set those values. So remember how the first time we went through the for loop, we didn't actually have a value for the college name yet. We didn't set that until after we got into the for loop. Well, in this case, we actually have to set the college name before entering the loop, because the condition for the loop to begin is that there's a college name set, and that college name isn't blank. So we can have it be set so that the college name equals cell I, comma 1. But in this case, we actually have to give that value for I. We have to set that before entering the loop as well. So we can say I equals 1. And now, when we step through this, the same thing is going to happen on the first time through. So it's going to say, oh, actually, sorry, we want to start with the first row, which is I equals 2. So here, as I step through, looks the same. So American University is the college name, and we actually don't need to name the college name previous until we enter the loop. So we're going to do while. So we're going to do the loop while, and there's a few ways to do it. You can do college name doesn't equal blank, or you can do college name. You can do the length of the college name is greater than 0. So anyways, both of those would serve the same purpose. len, this function will pull the length of whatever string we have here, and if it's greater than 0, we're going to do the loop. So both of those ways would solve the same purpose of looping through the entire list until we reach a blank cell. So that's the do while piece of the loop. So do while condition is true, and then you were gonna remember how we had the next I here. Well, similarly with the do while, it's going to be loop. So we're going to do while this condition is true. It's going to do all of the code between that and the loop, and then once it hits loop, it's going to jump back to the do while line and again check if this condition is true. So you might notice that we actually there's no reference to I within the loop, so we have to manually change I at some point. So we can do the last thing it does before it loops on itself is we can say I equals I plus 1. Yeah, which will just have it jump one row down. And from here, we have pretty much the structure set up in a similar way to we had it above. So we can actually just use some of the we can reuse some of the inside of the previous loop, and I'm just going to copy everything from where we name the college, name the previous college, and then the entire if cycle. So there we go. So the first time we go through this, it's actually going to name the it's going to identify the name of the college twice. You can see we have college name up here, and then it's going to do it again the first time through. But after that, it's we need the college name to be within the loop because we want it to keep renaming it every time, and always checking that if the college name is different from the previous college, then it's going to do the formatting. Otherwise, it's going to skip over that. And then before we loop through, it's gonna do I equals I plus 1, so go one row down and loop upon itself. So let's give this one a try, and I'm just gonna click play, and all right, yeah, it looks like it ran in just the same way. You can see that it actually renamed, or it gave that gray formatting to one row beyond where we would want it to give it to, because you can think about the last time it runs through the loop, it's going to do while the college name is while the length is greater than 0. So even though let's see, so it's going to do it for one extra row than we need to, and the reason for that is because the I equals I plus 1 is at the end of the code, so it's not going to register that it's gone too far until after it does that last line of code. So Annabelle, do you have a solution to that?
No, just wondering. No, just a question. Can you go just to the first two rows to see if it did anything with the market? See, okay, so then I did something wrong because it's not. I mean, it did for everything else except for American University. And I supposedly have the same stuff.
So what happened? It
did the formatting for everything except American University, so I don't know what exactly happened.
So did you? Let's see. Did you set I to 2?
Yeah.
And
that's interesting.
Do you want to? Let's see. We have a few minutes left. Do you want to share
No,
out?
that's okay. No, that's okay. I'll when you send the.
Yeah.
When you
Okay.
send the, I'll just check it. See
Okay.
what
Yeah, it's probably just a very small tweak, but for everything else, it formatted it okay?
Yeah, it did. It did.
Okay, so let me change. I'll reset it all back to white, and let's see if we can fix that last piece because it's not a big deal, but if we didn't want it to go that one extra row, we can probably fix that pretty easily. And let's see. I guess we would want it to go from I equals. So instead of having it change to the next row at the end of the loop, which is actually probably more typical, we can have it change to the next row as the first thing that it does. And we can set the initial 1, I, from 2 to I equals 1. So then think about what goes on here. So it's going to step through first I equals 1. We set the college name. Oh, yeah, that should be okay. And then it's going to, first thing it does is it jumps to I equals 2. And then it'll name our college and previous one, which is fine. But then, fortunately, the last thing that it does once it runs all the way through is it's going to hit this I equals 1 before it runs before it runs the if statement with the formatting that last time. So the condition should be met before it hits that blank cell rather than after. So if I run this all the way through, maybe I'm not so smart. Well, I was hoping that would work, but it looks like we still have this one extra line of gray formatting, which is kind of annoying. But I thought that would fix it, but maybe we'll have to revisit that next time. So, anyways, well, there you go. You got your loops. I'll set it back.
I don't know. Maybe another if or else. Just.
Yeah. Let's see. You could do if the college name doesn't equal college name previous, and length of college name is greater than 0, so also testing that it's not blank. So it's not quite as clean as I was hoping, because it will cycle through that one extra time.
Mm-hmm.
But let's see that. Yeah, so that prevents it from doing that last if. Good solution. Anyway, so there you go. We got our two different ways of doing the loops. We have the for loop and the while loop. Just by, I mean, I'm just curious. Do either of you, are you like drawn to one more than the other? Does it seem like one's more natural to you than the other type of loop?
I'm more used to the for one than for the do while one, but I think it's basically the same.
Yeah, I mean, it should be pretty similar. There are some cases where one will make a lot more sense than the other one. In this case, you can really do either just fine. Nan, for you, are you able to follow both of them, and does one of them make more sense to you?
My head is spinning.
Just like the loops.
Exactly. You're looping through it. Don't worry about it.
Good. Well, I mean, you can hopefully watch the video, and
Yeah, I will.
it'll make sense the second time through. This is really important, though, to make sure you're 100% on this. As, I mean, like I said, everything else you can really use the macro to record, and that'll get you pretty far. You can Google, which will also be a friend, but these loops are something you want to have down pat, and the both for and do while are really useful. So something that I would definitely recommend getting to know pretty well. But anyways, I can send out this file to you guys after, as well as repost the video for you, Nan, if you want to reference that. But anyways, that kind of gets us to the end of our loop session. Any questions on this, guys?
Nope.
No, well, all right. Glad you're understanding at least through this point. I'll work to send out some. I don't want to call it homework, but some practice material for you guys to work on, just so you can have some experience trying it by yourself, and then maybe we can look at that at the beginning of the next class. I know it's almost the weekend, so I probably won't send it out till Monday, but give it a shot next week if you have time, and we can revisit it during our class later on next week. It'll be something pretty basic, nothing more complicated than this, but just want to make sure you have some practice with the loops and are learning and enjoying. But yeah, that brings us to the end of probably the most important session, in my opinion. So yeah, please do reach out if you have any questions, and we'll revisit this definitely next week.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.